Yes, Winder, good afternoon.
Hello, Sam.
Haven't seen you in a few weeks, right?
Thank you.
Where are the kids today? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Cool.
So I forgot whether you said you were going to be gone, but I don't think you've been in the weekend meetings for the last couple of weekends, right?
I haven't.
So why today?
Seems important. It's kind of turning up to the same meetings over and over again, really. We have certain traits which keep reoccurring, and I'm just waiting for them to wear down naturally.
I also. So I try to write things down and share them, and write them down a different way and share them, and write them down in a different way and share them. And eventually people get to know what it is that bounces around inside my brain or mind. But it certainly takes a lot of impressions. And I'm curious to get some feedback.
It doesn't matter what our curiosity is. Those errors are inherent and they're going to keep happening.
Those what? Those errors?
Yeah. I can't think of a better word than errors.
So, to what do you specifically refer?
I tuned in, today is Saturday, I tuned in Thursday, which is hosted by our Dougie, which is nice. He's a nice bloke. Now, just a couple of little things. One little thing is he is the host, which is fine. He takes that he can interrupt or interject whenever he wants to, but he won't allow anybody else to interject when he's speaking. That can be a little annoying. Also, once he starts up on one of his long, when he gets flow, is that what he calls it? He doesn't like to be interrupted, which is okay, that can be understood. Normally, I usually have a writing pad or something to write on, a pencil or a pen close by, so I can make notes. But he, in his flow or his train of thought, makes several points, so that not only have we lost the point that I wanted or somebody else might have wanted to clarify, he's added more. And by the end of that, I'm thinking, well, which one is the one should I tackle now? So that continues the process over and over again. We're not clarifying anything. And one of the other things that's a big bugbear for me, this one is that we as individuals, hello Stacey, hello Neil, nice to see you.
Did you get any sleep?
No, he hasn't.
Anyway, I don't want to interrupt you, just Winder. I know
I won't forget that one. And this one is the most important. is that we as individuals, and me in particular, I have reached a stage where I think that I can do no more to make any difference about anything on the planet. Because the ones who are destroying the planet, they're not changing their ways at all. In fact, they're more adamant that they continue and increase the pace of consumption so they can have more money, maybe buy another private island or a yacht or something. So the whole mode of operation for me has changed in the last couple of years or so, from thinking that individually we can make a big difference to no. This now is at this critical stage where the whole planet has to get involved, and not just me changing my toothpaste or something like that. I'm complete. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, I wanted to welcome people. Jaswinder and I kind of got a little going a little bit early. I really appreciate the turnout here. And especially I want to welcome another groggy-eyed individual. I didn't get much sleep last night, but I believe Neil is here after probably, what, less than 2 hours nap. So we're honored to have you.
About an hour.
1 hour. I think I got about 2 hours, before I got up and started taking notes. So hello again, Jaswinder. Hello, Neil. Hello, Stacy. Hello, Alex. Hello, Joshua. Hello, Doug. How it goes? Okay, so many of you know I have some prepared remarks. For some reason, my voice is not as mellifluous as normal. But anyway, I wanted to open this up for an optional round of check-ins before we get going and dive deep. Going once. Neil.
Firstly, thanks, Sam, for knocking on the door, and apologies to those who haven't seen me for a while. I've been off on various journeys in different directions, but I overheard what Jaswinder was. Sorry?
Everybody knows Neil, right? Okay, good. All right.
Nice to see you all here. Thanks for the invitation. I couldn't help but overhear what Jaswinder was just saying, and in Australia we're facing another climate catastrophe weekend with bushfires raging. There's, when I went to bed, there were 35 in New South Wales and 16 in Queensland or something like that. Currently 3 lives lost, 7 missing, 150, 200 houses gone by now, I expect. And the weather's due to change again on Tuesday and make it worse again after a temporary reprieve. Got all our emergency staff on call, 17 simultaneous highest catastrophic fire rating fires going in New South Wales as we speak. And so, the climate catastrophe, the unfolding ecological crisis that I hear Jaswinder referring to is fully underway in Australia. And still we have the complacency and the willful ignorance of governments and others that are doing the damage. I have spent 6 weeks recently travelling to multiple players in my network, and with a wonderful lady called Anne Billen from Belgium. We'll be working together in helping to deal with ecological grief and also in collective presencing. She's currently at a collective presencing event in Belgium with a wonderful group of women, mainly women. So there's a need now for the masculine and the feminine energies to come together around the how do we sense what wants to be born, as well as how do we hold space for those that are feeling this grief. If I picked up correctly what Jaswinder was saying, there's a major difficulty here in the individual making a difference. However, collectively we might. And so I believe very strongly in complex adaptive reflexive systems and in step change that can occur through emergence. I also believe we can facilitate emergence by creating conditions for better things to unfold than otherwise would have unfolded. And so my efforts are in that area. I see beauty in almost every direction I look, but I also see and feel the ecological pain. And so I'm hoping to use my photographs, poetry, words and presence as mechanisms for engaging with people globally, but probably through small groups and starting with those willing, rather than trying to change those that aren't. And hopefully continue the support that I can as a bit of an elder to Extinction Rebellion and others in my part of the world. The youngsters who see people of my age and stature as quite often the boomers that are causing the problem, and just show them that there are some people out there like us that do actually give a fuck. So thanks for having me here this evening. And well, it's only 2:10 a.m. in the morning at the moment for me. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to say a brief thing at the start. Thanks very much.
Well, it's good to hear from you again. Good to see you again, Neil. And I also want to welcome my esteemed friend, someone I'm lucky enough to call friend, Professor Laszlo. It's been a while, from Buenos Aires. Hey, we're just doing an optional round of check-ins, Alexander. And so just Winder spoke, Neil spoke, and we're still in this optional round. So it's still open.
I came on last, so I'll go last.
Cool.
Hi, Alexander.
Well, then I'll go next. I had a rather interesting week that culminated with a very good call to my boss, who essentially let me now do the things that I said to him that I wanted to do. So life is good now at work. And so I relaxed a little bit and spent a couple of hours on a Friday evening putting together some notes. And 2 weeks ago, I think it was on a Friday, I sent around a poll. And you've probably all seen the notes that I culled from the poll. And I thought it was interesting. And I thought it told the story from my standpoint. And I think put together differently, it can tell other stories from other people's standpoints. So I was just hoping to show you the process that I went through in putting together those notes and how I assembled various contributions that people put into that poll and how it made sense for me. So I'm eager to do that at some point, whenever it's appropriate, but especially after the optional check-ins. On other aspects of my life, I have, in that direction, 10 puppies, all of now are approximately 9 or 10 plus pounds now. And they make a racket, and they make a lot of poop, and they make a lot of pee. So Ronnie and I spend probably 75 minutes plus every day now cleaning up the room. And now I got to start thinking about getting cages or something else. The single room is not working anymore. And looking forward to the fact that my son and my daughter and my son and both my daughters are actually going to get together Thanksgiving weekend here. So I'm really looking forward to that. And we're actually going to go see Amy later today. So I get to see him twice in 2 weeks. So right now, life is pretty good. With one more major change in life, then I actually think I might be able to breathe a little bit more. But that's my check-in for now. Joshua?
Sure, I'll do a check-in. Just really happy to be here on Saturday. Happy that it's Saturday, and it's barn raising time with Sam and the rest of the gang. And good to see you, Neil. I haven't seen you in a long time. And my check-in as far as barn raising goes is this week I listened to a wonderful podcast with Yarn. I'm pronouncing his name wrong, but it's a B-J-A-R-N-E. So Yarn Straustrup, who was the inventor of the C++ language. And it was a great podcast with Lex Friedman, who is an incredible AI technician at MIT who likes to interview people. And it was really interesting. The one thing I wanted to share with the group is the idea of making things very reliable. And that would be C++, which is used on everything from cars to airplanes to computer systems. And then making things that are emergent, which would be machine learning, which is things that are used on your Gmail or Google or search engines that emerge and get better. So just the idea of different ways to create in the modern times and when we need reliability and when we need emergence. So on Thursday, we had an open discussion. And Saturday, we have a barn raising. So just thinking, knowing where we're at with what we need, like when we need community and everyone to help and when we need individuals to do their thing. And just being aware that there's certain times for certain things. We would all like everything to be reliable and emergent, but in reality, when we're creating, it's not always the case. So that's my check-in today. I just wanted, that's where my head's at today. So guys.
Thanks, Joshua. Next
here, Alexander from Australia. Hello, Neil. I don't know this other guy, Alex, I won't try and pronounce your name until I hear it again. But things are progressing on the front line with activism. And so I appreciate the fact that we have weekly sessions and we can divide our time between these segments, and we understand, those of us who show up regularly understand the function of each different day. And it's important. I mean, for the fact that I'm not going to get my idea accepted today is important, because I know there's an opportunity next week to explain something. So it's not critical. The fact that we're here talking is critical. I mean, listening is part of it. The deep dives is something I miss with a passion, because it was the deep dives that got me off onto the road of self-publishing. And whatever we can do, I think, to encourage that with other people will be interesting. But that's getting off the topic of check-in and starting to get into the subject. But it is shocking to see what's happening over here. I try not to watch too much of the news because it's frightening what's happening, and it's a wake-up call. Over.
Thanks, Alex.
Hi, I'm Stacy.
Stacy.
I was interested in hearing what Neil and the last part of what Jaswinder was saying, because I'm most interested in helping to heal grief. And that's something that I think we do on an individual level. And I just want to keep reminding people that it does make a difference, one at a time. I'm complete.
Thanks, Stacy.
So I'm not a regular at barn raising. And these days I'm living my life very much in the emergent. And so my sensors are out for things that ping me. And Sam, your latest sharing did that. And there were multiple levels of why it did that. One was it's reflective of a new kind of emergence from my experience from you that isn't as anchored in projects and memes and, technology pieces of a puzzle, as much as it is sense making and emerging some kind of synthesis or cohesion out of the inputs that you got, and that is that's a new thing for me on multiple levels, in terms of the inherent openness of it, the co-creativity implicit in it, and the co-creation implicit in it. It's not projective. It's emergent, and a product of true co-contribution, co-creation. So you caught my eye. And my sort of energy and spirit, all the levels at which my sensors are out these days. And I'm sort of experiencing that in a bunch of different places. I'm very involved with one of George Poor's legacy things, which is EE and EE Community Conversations, and we're evolving that into community as EE as community. And there are groups that I'm also part of that are forming and that are new and that are evidencing signs of emergent self-organizing, lived emergent self-organizing formation, coalescence. Welcome, Douglas.
Dr. Carmichael.
And so I'm very curious, interested in where this goes, we go. With that, I'm complete.
So just a quick note before you go, Alexander. I'd like to welcome Douglas Carmichael. Douglas initiated a series of conversations starting, I believe, in January or February of 2011 on Wednesdays in Palo Alto, to which he kindly and generously invited me from time to time. So I gained a lot out of that. And so the skills or whatever I have in conversation stem from some of those days. Before then, I didn't know how to talk. But Doug's got a very interesting background. I'll let Doug tell about himself if he chooses to. So Doug, we're doing an optional round of check-ins. We have all gone except for Dr. Laszlo and Dr. Carmichael. You're not audible. You're on mute right now, Doug. Actually, you just had to hit the mute button, I think. That's all you needed. Are you still there? Yeah, you're still there.
He may have just turned off the video instead of turning on the audio. Should I take the time then just to move through this here, and unless let me move ahead then. I'm delighted to be here. Good to see you again, Sam, and several colleagues and friends. Yes, it has been a while. This is also, I'm sorry for being just a little late. It's just serendipity, in fact. I happened to see the messages, the exchange on the Facebook chat, and I said, oh, it's now. And I was already 8 minutes late, but I popped in. So thank you for your indulgence. I am speaking to you from Buenos Aires, Argentina. And I am involved in a project here with an organization called A Network for Grateful Living. The project is really inspired by much of Doug Engelbart's work on creating a network improvement community and creating a network improvement community of network improvement communities, the NIC of NICs, as he talked about it, and in the field of education. So we are calling this an evolutionary learning ecosystem comprised of evolutionary learning communities, or community of evolutionary learning communities. And we've dubbed ourselves the edunauts, like astronauts, but in the field of education, so we're edunauts. And we're boldly going into new learning territories and trying to create horizontal learning rhizomes, really, communities of learning together. So this barn raising is essential to this. We're just in the process now of launching our first pilot project, kind of a petri dish of 14 learning communities that we hope to create a learning community among. So that's very exciting for us. And just to mention two other things about why I'm so interested in what's going on here. I just saw, as I'm catching up, also the PowerPoint presentation that, or the slides that you have, Sam, reporting on the poll and how that's gone. And I'm sure that's what we'll be discussing today, but looking forward to that. And I've noticed that there's such an effervescence of these kind of conversation communities. Just to list a few, Ben Roberts has his Thriving Resilient Communities conversations. John Raymer and Summer Joy Raymer have their Synergized Impact Network Exchange project. John Keldon has the conversation communities. Ben Bowler has his World Weavers, and these are all conversation communities. And for me, the interest is also how do we make how to connect these as well. So fascinating. That last thing to share with you, I don't want to take up too much time, but through John Raymer and Gene Bellinger, friends of mine in the systems world, who work with Kumu as an organizing framework. We've also looked at something that's more tailored. It's in a beta testing process for it's by the people who made Kumu, and I'm going to put it here in our chat area. It's called Weaver. I don't know if you've known about it, but I'm interested in testing that out, and it's about fostering communities. Since Kumu is more about mapping them, Weaver is the intention behind Weaver is about bringing them into conversation and into relationship. So just to share that with you, and I'm checked in. It is 1:30 here in Buenos Aires, and Alexander, it's Alex and that's where my name, they were the ampersand, but it's simply Alexander as well. All right, checked in.
Good to see you again, Alexander.
So I figured out my mute, so I can probably be heard now.
Yep.
Terrific. Very briefly, I started out as a physicist thinking that that was the way to understand the world. And then I figured out that what physicists meant by the world is not what I meant by it. So I went off and studied psychoanalysis with Erich Fromm and practiced for a long time, and have also done a lot of consulting. These days in the field of economics and politics, since both are broken, what do we do? I'm very concerned with climate change issues. I think we shifted from agriculture to dependence on fossil fuels. Let the population and the economy grow, and there's no path back, but where we are is broken. So it's a very dangerous time. And that's what I spend my time thinking about.
Yeah, from what I know about Doug, I could talk for the next 20 minutes about what Doug's doing and what he's involved in. So we're really lucky to have Doug here today. Anybody else with any other thoughts before we ask for topics for today? I have one. Joshua.
Yeah, I just wanted, before we venture into a conversation, we've had the conversation for 2 years about how do we connect all these communities together. And I was hoping we could shift the conversation, Alexander, from how, but to when. Because I don't think the how is the question. I think it's when do we do it? We know how to do it, but when are we going to do it? So if we could just avoid having the how conversation, that was my ask for the conversation today. Thank you very much. Complete.
May I respond to that? To me, the answer to your question has always been the time is now. And to me, how has not been quite so obvious to me. So if it's obvious to you, let's do it now. But, there's always been a number of ways to do it. And I know that there's various different tentacles being sent from community to community. And, some of those tentacles stick and some of those actually don't stick. They bounce off, which I think is natural. So I think that's a natural process I've been seeing across these networks. But if you've got a more, let's say, sticky solution, we can get that in as well. Okay, so that's one topic. Yeah, Alex, did you have one?
The fact that 99% want something means that they got to vote, and that's democracy. The 1%, who are they? They're less than 1% of the very extremely wealthy. But when you have democracy, you don't need 99% to get something moving. You only need 50, 55, 60. It's very easy to get a movement growing, a huge amount of people involved in something, because we know that over 80% of them want it. It's a big market out there for change. But the hard work is bringing them together, connecting these various forums and conversations over. same topic.
You're muted, Sam.
Sam,
Oh,
you're
sorry.
muted.
Alex, so how would you just name that topic succinctly?
Call it cohesive unity.
Okay, so the first one I'm going to call how and when to do nicking. Sorry, I'm going to do shorthand here. And you say cohesive
Local
way
unit.
to do
Local, the word local would be interesting to put in there.
local. Okay.
Local or local.
Local.
Yeah.
And 3 is my offering to discuss some of the poll findings and formulate a story out of it. Okay? All right. Yeah,
And just
Neil.
before we start, can I just say how impressive Joshua's image is at the moment? A bit like a dark samurai knight coming over the mountains.
Yeah, you get other images when he walks around his property. You get to see a lot of the construction going on. Okay, so knowing that I did do the announcement, and some people were possibly teased by the announcement, may I start with topic number 3, which is the poll summary. Any objections? Okay, I don't think this should be very long. I just want to give you a process that was how I played around with this data. So let me just ask one question first. Would you like me to share the screen, or would you all just like to separately follow along so that we can see each other's faces? I've actually arranged my screen so that half of it is the presentation, half of it is my Zoom screen. So if I share my entire screen, you can still see everybody. So I'm going to try that if that's okay. Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to share my desktop here once I find my mouse, because I have a large screen, so sometimes I have to. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Let me know when it's coming across. Oh wait, it's not going to let me keep my Zoom window big. How do I do that?
But we each, Sam, we each have the, we can each see the rest of the gallery. We can see everyone else
Let me
as
just
well.
do it that way. So I'll only share my my presentation then. All right. So I'm not going to use presentation mode because it's probably large enough that you can actually see this. So I'm going to just step through this quickly, okay? So 2 weeks ago, I set up a poll, seeded it with about 6 memes or themes that I was recalling from our conversations here in GCC. And then very quickly, there became probably 2 or 3 or 4 dozen other items that got added to this. So I said, you know, there's no purpose in just collecting the results if you're not going to actually look at these results. So I wanted to look at these results. But a little bit of background, which most of you don't need, really is the GCC here was a group that formed initially to respond to the Global Challenges Foundation request for proposal. And the request for proposal was new governance models that we think would be better for the planet. And it's really one way to respond to Buckminster Fuller's question, which I put on this slide. So this is the Global Challenges Foundation page. If you go there, this is what you're going to see. And this is what we responded to. So the poll was set up 2 weeks ago. If you click on this link, you'll actually go there. The question was, what are the top memes, themes, issues that you see important to GCC? Now, there's a little bit of history here because we've been going for 2 years. And the question was, what governance models do you propose? In the proposal, we didn't propose any governance model. We actually said we need to talk to each other. We need to get the best from each other. For 2 years now, we've been doing that in these conversations. They take place Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, although Fridays is, I think, on hiatus at the moment. And when people come to this group, it's not entirely clear what to make of it because we actually haven't, you know, constituted ourselves with formal charters, formal agreements. We're still kind of in this, it appears, divergent gathering mode. So I wanted to gather these again in this poll. This poll was set up on the 26th. This snapshot was taken last night. I do note, however, that various people have come to the poll and added some options since I sent the announcement out. So this is just valid as of last night. Now, here are the results. By far, head and shoulders above all the rest, this item called co-visioning was elected by 14 people. I did ask people to restrict their selections to 3 per, but some people took the opportunity to make more selections than that. So on the other hand, this one was a clear standout from the standpoint of people who participate in this. Now, coexistence and inclusion, interestingly, are the next 2. So they represent the top 3 items in this list. Now, all the other ones you would think have actually gotten a lot of airtime, but didn't make it to the top 3. And just for completeness, I'm going to step through some of these. I actually identified them out, and then these are the ones with 1 or more options. So they include the previous list, but there's also this lower list here, starting with smart people problems, going all the way down to social inclusion for the elderly, that only received one vote each. Alex voted for a number of items. And then this list here is the stuff that you think we spent some time on and seemed to be important, but didn't get any votes at all when people actually were asked to just limit it to the first 3, okay? So specifically governance, for example, which is the reason we got together in the first place, Neil noted, didn't get any. Agreements, which I've actually been talking about quite a bit, didn't get any. We've been talking about the failures, as Jaswinder was talking about, and others commented on. Democracy, capitalism, permaculture, economy, they didn't get any votes. Corruption didn't get any votes, okay, all the way down. You can see this list, okay? So what I did next was to just identify them, say, hey, the top 3 get green, the others with multiple votes got yellow, the ones with 1 vote got pink, and I tried laying them out. So I took the top 3 items and said, if you focus on those 3, could you then drive the conversation and include some or most of the rest of these items? So I found in co-visioning, I personally thought that all of these other ones, community of impact, planetary impact, co-creation, values, purpose, awakening, paradigm shift, stewardship, conscious evolution. I'm doing this for audio purposes, by the way. Shared memory, thrivability, human being 2.0, permaculture, and the old industrial frame, to me, and this is arguable, you could do it your own way, fit in this co-visioning cluster. If you look at coexistence, I found collaboration, accepting new people, holding space, transparency, safety, agreement, curiosity, generosity, connection, psychopaths, power, trust, corruption, economy, democracy, capitalism, agreements, and governance, which are all issues in coexistence. And then in inclusion, the all of us or none of us theme includes the universal basic income, income disparity, unity, social inclusion, local tribe startups, that I clustered. There were a few that I found didn't fit quite so neatly into these first 3 clusters. So I just left them here on the slide. There's spirituality, God, non-duality, love, smart people problems, rabbit holes, deep despair, fear, and fun. Okay. So if I took all of these items and tried to figure out how are they connected, and I tried for a bit and nothing seemed to pop out at me as far as a pattern, but if I spent more time with this, I think I could make something emerge. So I tossed the white bullets. So I left only the ones that were either 1, 2, or more votes, okay? So I came up with something like this. These were connections that I found between these, okay? So if you see co-visioning, coexistence, and inclusion still in green, I find that much of it flows through where you start with evolution and love and coexistence, and you flow through how you create community so that you can then worry about collaboration and agreement and transparency and accepting new people, planetary impact, et cetera, okay? Now, in the inclusion area, I found all of these other items in the lower left. So I didn't draw arrows, but those are all part of the inclusion area. Lastly, what I did was I handpicked my own memes through the batch. And so I tossed a few, I included a few. And to me, then, this is a flow which in my brain, I can now render visually so that maybe it makes some sense to you. And I'm looking for feedback, especially on this particular slide. And I'm going to spend a slightly few more seconds on this one here, okay? Which is, granted that we're trying to get some co-visioning done. By co-visioning, I don't mean come up with a single charter. I mean so that we all understand each other and what is important to each other, okay? I don't believe coherence in any absolute way is good or useful, but that we can share all of this is good. So we actually discuss values, purpose, we awake ourselves, we actually try and look at what it means to consciously evolve. This is one of the topics I love talking to Alexander about. And to me, spirituality falls in this particular area as well, although for me specifically, not the God item, okay? Now, if you take that, ideally, the world thinks we would all be better off if we all loved each other. But that to me is a huge hurdle. And before we get there, if we just manage to coexist in some reasonable manner, that's a step towards universal love. So I actually identify coexistence as one of our most important targets to try and move toward, okay? Now, this community of impact, and no, by the way, Alexander was one of the first people to discuss with me, and David Price and Dino Karabeg, and also Frode Hegland, this community of impact idea, which is an emergent way that we can actually personally just embrace and adopt and practice things that would bring about good kinds of scaling, okay? When you want to do things that don't counter each other's efforts and preferably amplify each other's efforts, okay? So that's the community of impact idea, and I'll spend a little bit more time maybe later on that one. So that then gives us a population which is not necessarily all 8 billion people on the planet, but a sufficient number that would want to co-create, would want to share artifacts, and want to make a planetary impact. So that we can collaborate for stewardship of the planet, so we can provide thrivability to the planet, include everyone, and overcome these issues that block us, you know, these smart people problems of which I've cataloged over a dozen now. And to do it in such a way that we have some transparency, we have generous and curious leaning in when it comes to what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? This is the agreement/disagreement poll that we seem to be dancing around for quite a bit for the last 2 years as well. Hopefully so that we can actually come up with ways that we can behave with each other, which is another way of looking at governance. And if we can get that far, then we can work towards the human being 2.0, which to me at least encompasses connection, trust, and fun, but then can specifically be targeted at all the other ills of the world or maladies of the world, and specifically focus on permaculture, safety, universal basic income disparity, and then redefine capitalism and democracy and imagine a new economy so that we can dispense and dispel fear, and hopefully transparency and all these other mechanisms can minimize or eliminate corruption and power politics, and in particular, dangerous components of civilization. So this is kind of a quick, really broad brush view towards a layout that I found where I could actually tell a story behind all of these different poll results, okay? And that's one that I'm not gonna continue pushing on, but it felt like in even this form, I was actually very willing to hear some feedback and get some feedback. And just to tell you what the rest of the slide is I just included a few other things for context. And there's a separate little outline, which I've linked to in this thing called the foci of GCC. If you click on that, it goes to an outline where the top level is all of these items, okay? And I published this or shared this maybe about a month ago with GCC. And the next item is this community of impact idea, which I worked on quite a bit with Dino and David and Frode and Alexander, as I mentioned, okay? Now, the way I look at these two items is I actually go back to a lesson I learned in Tai Chi, which is if you practice what is written and what is recommended and what I'm exploring in the community of impact document, this is essentially my version of how to be yourself. If we can co-evolve and learn and share and refine and iterate the foci of GCC, the co-visioning and etc., this is how we be together. So if you take a look at both of those elements, this actually made a powerful impact to me yesterday as I looked at this, because one of the very first lessons I learned from Tai Chi is, why do you do forms? You do forms in order to understand yourself, your balance, your connections, your continuity, your smoothness, etc. Why do you do push hands? Why do you do sparring? It's so you can learn about your opponents, in double quotes, okay, or partners. And in Tai Chi, the conclusion is, if you actually know what is possible with yourself, what is possible with your partner or opponent, and you can prepare yourself for what's happening, then fear goes away. There is no fear. Which led me to realize that one of the key lessons in the Course in Miracles is, when there is no fear, there's nothing left but love. So that's the story I'm trying to tell. And that's the story I'd like to get some feedback on. Now, all of you have this link, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can actually look at each other better now. So I just want to thank you for allowing me this 10 or 15 minutes or so to walk through these ideas. This is obviously work in progress, and there's many other items that I'd like to link into this. But I just was curious enough, and I respect all of you enough that I would really love some feedback on any of this, either now, if you're prepared, or at any time in the future, after you've had a time to digest this, review this, think about this, or even have a conversation with me on this, okay? So that's what I wanted to bring to Barn Raising today, and thank you for listening, and I will shut up now. Alex, you had your finger up?
Yeah,
Josh, Neil?
whenever there's a change, leaders emerge of the new system. When there's a collapse in the system, when civilizations re-emerge, there's always a leadership, and the leader will look to the people for guidance. He will go to the smaller groups and consult with the wider community. So if we have an established group in the local community, we've got a voice. Without that, we're nothing. We're a global group without any impact. Look at what's happened to the United Nations, for example. And so I wanted to stress, that's all, I just wanted to stress that co-visioning on a local basis is just as important as this global group, I think. Over.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Josh, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. I want to just say thank you for that incredible amount of work, because I'm looking at what you did, and that is one of the most in-depth analysis that I've seen here at the GCC. So thank you for really taking some time to look through everything and go through everything and then think about it from your perspective. And I think that's wonderful. I'd like to stay focused on my original point, which is the when and not the how. And the reason why is because we might not know the how here at GCC to co-vision and to communicate to all these other communities. But I feel like Ben Roberts with the Movement Weavers has created an amazing how, which is when people come into a Zoom call and they want to separate and have separate conversations, he's got a whole system for putting it on a shared document and then have different rooms that he's really worked hard to be able to say, if you want to have this conversation, go here. And one point that I wanted to bring up that builds on that point is how we do it. We might not know here, but others might know, but not having that conversation with others is the drawback. So in order to have that conversation with others, this is a very hard thing to do, but I think it's quite easy and possible if we try, is we've learned to trust each other here, and we can send a delegate from GCC into a conversation with the Movement Weavers and allow one person to listen and report back. And we can also exchange that, meaning we could do that per week, per month, at different points in time. But I would love to send you, Sam, over to these other communities and share with them what you just shared with us so that they can see that. And I think the new economy, the new paradigm, the new shift that we're moving towards is the transaction of ideas. And if ideas have emerged out of here that you just showed us from this poll, letting those ideas go to other communities and let them talk about those things and come back to us, that would be the co-visioning. That's what we're hoping to get to. And it seems simple, but the hard part is, who do we pick as a delegate to go to the other community and represent us, and vice versa? In these other communities, who do they pick? And how do we know? We can be stuck with the hows and the governing forever, as opposed to just try it and see if it's working. Meaning, if Neil Davidson comes to our group and says, hey, this is what we've been working on, and it sparks a whole bunch of new ideas, that gives us a few weeks to sit and talk about those new ideas. So I just really feel that the how would be, how do we get delegates to go to other places? So I just want to start thinking in terms of people that we trust in our community to represent the hundreds of hours of conversation, that has a great memory and is a great communicator, to come back and say, here's what I learned from being in these meetings with other communities. In other words, if we don't start cross-pollinating, we're in a vacuum. And that to me is the problem with the whole world, is we're all working in our own vacuums, because there's some people that have been working on permaculture for 80 years now, and there's other people that just learned about permaculture and think, wow, we got to do permaculture. It's like, hey, we've been doing this for 80 years. Let's listen to those people. And with that, I'm complete. I just want to say the how would be to talk to the people that are the best communities of communication and organizing conversations, and let them do what they do best, is weave those conversations together. And Ben Roberts is the first one that came up, but maybe you guys know a better community that is good at listening and delegate, what's the word I'm looking for? It's clearly setting up conversations so that everyone is heard. I think we're pretty good at that, but I think there might be other communities that are better than us, and allow them to do what they do best. With that, I'm complete. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Neil.
Thanks, Joshua. Just picking up on your wonderful work there, Sam, and you mentioned it in the brief messenger chat before I went to sleep about 2 hours ago, that you were sense-making. And complex adaptive systems and complex adaptive reflexive systems like this group here evolve by seeing themselves in motion. So by creating that map and talking that through now collectively, I can see resonance and coherence with multiple maps in the past, including deep wisdoms, with the Phalan Gong family I'm living with at the moment, and their truthfulness, compassion and forbearance in terms of inclusion and tolerance, with ancient wisdoms around the Tai Chi, the movement with, and the repositioning of and the redirecting of energies, with the love and the fear and the wonderful words that Alexander Laszlo has put up on the screen there, which resonate very much with me. A lot of this is around building coherence. You mentioned right at the start spirituality. I noticed, and you'd had conscious evolution, but there was no consciousness. And so to me, the system consciousness, the individual consciousness within the system, and the awareness of the systemic trends, directions, things that are happening, and the embodiment of those elements with authenticity is what's going to give you the trust to be a leader and or a delegate going to another group on behalf of. Because they want to see that you understand the context in sufficient detail and understanding to allow you into their fold without disruption, and for them to get value from what you're bringing. And so I think what you've got there is a basic map that shows how the elements that came out of a poll now lead to the next level of sense making. And now we're looking for the how to connect with other groups. I think some here are correct in terms of saying we know how, it's about when, but I think there's an element here of the how we engage with. The how we engage with is as trustworthy agents on behalf of in the context of the whole. And so that's my sense of what you put up there. So well done, mate. Complete.
Thank you, Neil. Anyone else? Just a quick note for Phalan and Christopher. We had a round of check-ins, and then I just walked through about a 15-minute slide presentation, which is in the GCC group, so you probably have reviewed it yourself already. But we just did that, and people are now reacting to it.
Christopher's got his mute on.
Christopher, you're speaking, but your mute is on. Yes.
I didn't hear the last of what you said.
Are you talking about me or Christopher?
No, you. I didn't hear the last of what you said.
Oh, I said I walked through a 15-minute presentation, which is linked to the GCC Facebook group. And so we are now hearing feedback from people here. So we heard from Neil, we heard from Joshua, we heard from Alex so far. And though you didn't hear it directly, if you reviewed it, you're also welcome to provide feedback. I'm curious to get feedback from as many sources as possible. Cursory as well as later on more considered, if you choose to do so.
I'm noting that Christopher's still talking, but he's still muted.
Yeah, in the bottom left corner, Christopher, there should be, if you hover your mouse, if you don't see it.
All right, Christopher, I'm going to unmute.
Time, and there's...
Okay, Christopher, you are now unmuted. You can now be heard.
All right, thank you, Sam. I was just saying, I've been away for some time. Been busy in the fields trying to. It started raining now here in Zambia, so I've been busy with the field preparations and also working out the exams for the students. But I've gone through your layout. I appreciate it so much. Just like Alex and Neil, they have said, I believe we can speak volumes if we begin to share with other platforms. They begin to see our ideas and see how we can make it amplified, that people, even these who are involved in policy formations, they would begin to adopt our ideas. Because the challenge that has been is so many things have been spoken even before I was born and written in a lot of books, but people have read books and have not implemented even valuable insights like this. Your layout is so simple, so understandable, and easy to be adopted. But who are the key people? Which are the key platforms that we can begin to share our ideas with, and they begin to buy into our ideas, not just through writing and putting in their documents, but also through implementation. That's what I would do. I would say each one of us with other groups that we belong to, if we can have this layout and begin to share also and get the feedbacks. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Stacy, you're making a move.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I agree with what Josh was saying, but I think it's really important to send more than one person. We look a little bit more diversified now than when we started, but, it starts at this small level. And I think sending more than one person, you're also sending more than one perspective and you're receiving more than one perspective.
Yes, I'd just add to that when you're doing any consolidation and coherence building process, it's the difference that makes the difference. And Sam, a lot of the work that you've done there was, to me, divergence and then convergence. And so what you've done, and good facilitation processes allow the divergent and diverse voices, hear them, allow them to be seen to have been heard, and then weave them together in ways that people can see their component is still in the picture. That then builds trust and recognition that, yes, I'm still represented, and then weaves it back together again and builds into the next most coherent point. And at that pinch point again, you then say, and now what? which is what Ben's doing with the conversation stuff as well. So the weaving is critical. The individual pieces are critical. A poll allows you to get individual pieces, but it takes a certain degree of system consciousness and initiative to then weave those as you've done today. And it takes a system understanding to see whether that is relevant to the individual and the collective. So without a common understanding of the systemic issues, it's very hard to agree that something makes sense or meaning. In that context, however, and so to me there's multiple iterative processes here, a nested sequence of divergences and convergences, and the critical element is the sort of agreement building and certainty building that comes through groups like this coming together at these points. Because if you can maintain the threads, you can still show the individual threads within the finished pattern. So the pattern of the jumper or the crocheted piece still has the red thread, the blue thread, the green thread, whatever. Which one is most prominent and how it's woven together depends on the flows that happen between those pinch points. And so you're showing not just threads, but the emerging pattern. And you're checking to say, if this is where I'm going next, is this the pattern people want to see? And does it make sense for what we're trying to build together? Complete.
Thank you, Neil. Anyone else with feedback? I have some feedback to the feedback, but I want to give people a chance to express the feedback first. Would it be too hostile for me to ask for specific individuals, or should I give my feedback? Alex, Alexander, you're shaking your head, so I'm going to see if you have any thoughts based on this.
Well, I've been sharing a variety of links and connections here. Joshua has put forward a lot about Ben Roberts' work, and so I didn't put that there because he's covered that very well. But I put a few others. I think one of them from Alex also put forward a link there with movement weaving. This one from Ben Bowler I think is particularly interesting on now what. It's really bringing together diversified conversations in an enormous spread, and the same thing can be said for the Synergized Impact Network Exchange. I'm so impressed with what they're doing, and they are definitely knowing how to do this, and still there's these separate universes of tremendous initiatives with regard to conversations. So I think this is, we're doing what we should be doing. We are being the systems we wish to see in the world here now. I think this is the work. We are being that, and so I'm very appreciative of this conversation community, because just by doing this, having these conversations, there is a patterning that we are generating, and that patterning affects others directly and indirectly. So I don't have anything else specific to say. Just I hope that some of those links can be useful as well for connecting.
Thank you, Alexander. Anyone else who hasn't yet spoken with a thought? I know Alex has his finger up.
My thought was about the search algorithm. If each member of this group had a page of their own with links to things like co-visioning, environmental issues, global conversation, etc., with a page with those links on it, the AI is looking at those pages and taking note of the topics, right? It's looking at the hashtags and all that. So the more of us who do this, then the more accurate the AI is becoming at finding this stuff. and helping people locate us. Over.
There's a dimension there's a dimension to this having to do with the individual. And my lens tends to gravitate toward the experiential. So what's my opportunity or channel to play? What's my opportunity value to bring or to contribute? And from an inclusiveness standpoint, how does whatever the it is enable gaining the benefit of and realizing the maximum generative contribution and potential of as many people as possible that want to play? So that unpacks into volition on an individual basis. And it has to do with grappling with and incorporating at least a sensitivity and awareness of the diversity of awareness, consciousness, knowledge, skill set, understanding, ability that attaches to human beings as human beings, because they show up with just this unbelievably robust, infinite diversity, and no two are alike. And so one piece of the puzzle, one piece of my reaction puzzle is, whoa, slow down, not so fast. You have the questionnaire, you've got the extracted top 3 from the questionnaire. My sense goes to, okay, what's the next escalation of inquiry on a panel-wide basis? Now, it's a really interesting phenomenon when you have the list and you go, pick 3, as opposed to pick 6, or as opposed to pick as many as apply. So there's a forcing function in the pick 3 that I think, in and of itself is a powerful thing. I orphaned some of my own, nearest and dearest pet memes, because within the frame of a pick 3.
As did I, by the way.
Yeah. So, but the discretion in that construct was mine, right? So even discussing that and the tension around that, and was there anybody who, well, you said Alex didn't confine himself to 3. So he was like, I don't need no stinking limitation on how many I can pick. I can pick as many as I resonate with. And what does that do to it? So I really come from this, crawl before we walk before we run level of sensitivity, awareness to those challenges and issues, because the paradigm we're in, the existing paradigm we're in, is so focused on the trains running on time and getting to the result and getting to the aggregated and the we and the networks meeting other networks and the dissemination and it goes really fast to that. And how many people with invaluable generative contribution are left behind because that train is running so fast that they don't have a chance to get on board. And at least a core value, sort of a foundational value to me, is that it's all of us or none of us. If we don't have everybody on board and in and honored and included, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the sociopaths and everything in between, if it's not all of us, we're going extinct. And we're running out of time. So it's got to be an inclusive frame. An inclusive frame doesn't mean patriarchally I'm including everybody because I'm going to take care of them. Inclusive on a value level, on an internalized level, is welcome. You're empowered. You're an agent. You have a voice. You have to be part of this. And we don't pull out of the station until that's done. So, and I get the sort of tension in that, like, so we never pull out of the station. Well, I think there are so many things and so many people involved in so many initiatives and projects in the tens of thousands that are about pulling out of the station. So how many people are really focused on making sure everybody's on the train? So, you know, individual initiatives and what they're contributing to the aggregate whole as a, quote, solution or evolution is part of this too. And I think part of the segmentation of GCC's sessions, where you came up with barn raising and Sunday was about unblocking because of individual triggers grinding progress to a halt on an emotional and embodied basis. And the open session being the open session because that's the emergence, right? And whatever's to become a Friday, since that just became undesignated. But, you know, is part of that faceting of, you know, for those that want this, go here. For those that want that, go there. For those that want something else. And my focus and attachment of value was on, are we sprouting? Like, are there more sessions being born? Which, you know, I love Ben's construct and what he's evolving. I think it's really, really powerful. I find it experientially really challenging to play. It's a high bar, and I'm pretty good. I mean, the tools and the multiple things going on at the same time and going with the assimilating the technology and practice of all of that. But it's a really high bar for me. And you know, God have mercy on somebody who doesn't have those fluencies. So it's like, I don't know, I'm going to stop there. I didn't mean to run that long, but that's my feedback, and I'm complete.
Muted.
You're muted, Sam.
Sorry, Josh. I saw your hand, but I was just curious to see whether Phalan or Douglas or Jaswinder would like to have a turn at feedback.
Yeah, I wanted to hear Stacy. I think she raised her hand, and Alex too raised his hand. So I'm happy to go after them.
I'll go really quickly before I forget it. I just want to step back for a minute after what Doug just said and say that, you know, Sam talks about smart people problems, which I've already said, I think applies to any group that's empowered with decision-making or leadership. And I just wanted to note that only one person voted thinking that that was something that should be looked at. And that just goes to the whole idea of not looking at ourselves. And I just wanted to highlight that for a minute.
Douglas, you're making a move.
Well, since I'm kind of a newcomer to this group, what I might say might be pretty irrelevant or covered many times. But as I listen, I'm struck by my experience in the 70s and 80s, when people were first talking about learning organizations. And what was striking to me was especially in corporations, but also in government agencies, when they would talk about the learning organization, they always talked about process and never got to talking about what it is to learn. What's the content? I think that conversations like this is my personal view, work best when you go back and forth between process and actual serious questions. There's a tendency for the conversation to become kind of abstract and ungrounded, which makes me nervous. Part of it is my own situation in life right now of trying to cope with the realities of climate change and the fact that we've got to stay under 2 degrees, and the only way to do it is to stop using fossil fuels. And there's no way to stop using fossil fuels except to put the brake on a lot of the economy, which means unemploying a lot of people, breaking banks, and probably leading to violence. It's the reality of that kind of stuff that makes the process stuff so interesting to me. How do we hear each other? But hearing each other, if we don't have anything to say, seems to me not so terrific.
It's not a matter of that we may or may not have things to say.
Thanks, Doug.
The amount of information that's under consideration here is tremendous, even for smart people. And as Stacey's already mentioned, that's not something that we should leave out. Probably consider that at some time or other. And to consider that we are all smart people, that may be part of the problem. As just to come back to what Douglas has just said, this 2-degree business, and it may not be feasible to do much about it at this stage, and how we learn to learn. Douglas, I think I'm about 10, perhaps 15 years younger than you, but I have had a look at this, our ability and what we have achieved in the last 75 years. Post-war, the global population in its ability to do things and to come forward and to learn and apply what it learns has been at a tremendous pace. I would not have envisaged it in the 70s. It's a totally different outlook. So my consideration on that is that if we all globally, especially the advanced countries, the G8, G9 group, got together, we could reverse almost all the damage of the last 70, 80 years in less than 5 years. And that's only my personal opinion, just looking at our development. The amount of energy that we're burning, fossil fuels, oil, coal, gas, etc., but those 3 main ones, is being kept artificially high by those very same countries that have the technology to tackle it. We are not, these countries, I'll keep it specific, these countries are not sharing their technology. These countries are not sharing any technology at all. They want to remain on top. Now, I may be speaking perhaps from a point of view that may be conceived as bias. It may be so, but that does not detract from the fact that nevertheless they are doing this. They want to maintain their dominance. To bring the other countries on board is the same as mentioned in this group, is how do we keep everybody else on board, and that was Doug's bright part, is the same thing, is to bring them up to speed. And if we don't do that, then we will continue the error, the gross error that has been committed over the last 500 years of not sharing the Industrial Revolution, of not sharing the present technological revolution, and at the same time trying to appear to be benevolent. And this is warmed me up slightly, and I do appreciate maybe I'm coming along a bit strongly, but it's my planet as well, and I want to survive for a wee while longer. Yes. I'll leave it at that. I'm complete for now. Thank you.
So we have Stacy and Josh and Neil, I think, all lined up. But just to note, Phalan also hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah, please, Neil, go ahead, and Phalan, whoever wants to go first.
You're okay with that, Stacey? Thanks, mate. Just picking up on Douglas Carmichael's wisdoms there, process and asking the right questions or having the right things to say. In a good facilitation process, there's a structured process which allows for people to know where their piece is going to come and how we're going to hold the group together in a container with sufficient difference. But there's also the space for the neophyte question, the childlike question, the naive question, the wild card question, which deliberately plays the card like Greta Thunberg has done, which speaks truth to power, that asks questions from beyond the process. And to factor that back into the process takes conscious effort. And it's the conscious effort that you're trying to get, because that equals growth. When you can get individuals to consciously have to consider the next question rather than the next part of the script, then you're starting to get change. And so there's a critical element to this about balancing the process with the right questions, but it's not necessarily a scripted, fully timed, agendaed process. It actually needs to have somebody who is nuanced in when to play the next card. And the when to play the next card depends on being fully present and sensing the tells, the telltale signs, who's holding the facts, who's holding the next solution, who's holding the next question. A bit of that goes on in these groups about who's raised their hand to be the next person to speak. But in a facilitated process, you're sensing the body language of the whole. And my sense is that one of the major benefits of these Zoom conversations that have come up now in the last few years is that you can see all the individuals. And so to me, it's the subtle, this is the subtle acknowledgement, like some of you are nodding now. Phalan's still rubbing his lovely beard. But there's this acknowledgement of, yes, I'm hearing you, brother, or I'm seeing you, sister. And there's also when the facilitator or the person asking that question, although asking it naively, if well timed, it shifts the whole group. And that is the collective presencing, that is the collective intelligence emerging, that's the emergent process. So to me, if we can work out ways of facilitating this emergence in ways that isn't forcing a structure, which some people find meaningless because it doesn't have sufficient wild cards, and controlling the wild cards so there's at least still some process, and showing how we're touching base with the sense making, pinching the threads back together again to show this is the pattern that's emerging. And that is a different skill to what is generally being used in leadership. So leadership is still about leading from the front or consulting with all the people, right? And trying to find that mechanism for how we can hold the collective loosely while gently steering or allowing them to see where they're going in systems context. And that's your murmuration of starlings. That's your, it's allowing flow with some intention, but without control for mutual benefit. And I'll stop there, thanks. Phalan, you're still muted. Okay.
What I find to be a reoccurring theme is that somehow or another we haven't established a cohesive story of what that is. And Sam and I have had a couple of conversations where I've covered this developing narrative that's kind of directing a lot of the design work that I'm doing, and I would say my worldview at this point, this anthropomorphized us within a Gaian context. What is the doing that we're all immersed in? How are we relating to each other? Are we relating to each other as part of a whole? Can we somewhat identify with what we see ants do? Can we take kind of like the conscientious, I would venture to say like a conscientious kind of like superposition, you know, where we can see all of us globally as acting in some kind of concert that's being directed toward by something else. That's kind of like the story that's developing in my mind at this point, and I think it's directly connected to what you're saying, Doug. This, how do we envision ourselves in this collective consciousness? You know, by seeing us and seeing the systems that we've constructed around this earth as part of a greater chain of systems, and being able to identify with a collective body, I think that there's something there. I'm playing with it a little bit. But I know for a certain fact that story somehow has to be a focal point. What kind of story can you get people to unify under and direct them to that space that you're talking about, that emergent space where leadership doesn't necessarily matter, but somehow intrinsically we just know exactly what we need to do. I mean, even more imperative now, given that we seem to be blindly just racing towards a cliff, you know, with neoliberalism, with the impact on the planet. I think that accountability is there too, within that story, the collective us story, the accountability for each other and the planet. With that, I'm complete.
Thank you. Josh, Stacy? And then I've got some notes.
Yeah, I've just been waiting to build off of what Doug Breitbart said earlier and what Douglas Carmichael said, and then everybody in between. And I just want to go back to our collective memory here at GCC, is we've spent about 2 years talking about governance and governing a group here in Zoom and on Facebook. But the idea of governing something that hasn't yet been created is, to me, absolutely insane. I feel like we've had insanity, and it's been a fun journey of insanity, but we're governing something that isn't created. So I wanted to go back to what Doug Breitbart said in an analogy of a train station and getting on a train and going on a journey. And what does it mean to create that train station where, I don't know if anyone here has been to a large train station like Penn Station in New York, but first you have to buy your ticket, then you have to look at this board and wait for your train to come into the station, and then there's a mad rush to get onto the station. And then you hope you're on a pretty good train car. You hope there's not babies crying or someone having a problem. So the reason I'm bringing up this analogy and this metaphor is the journey is more important than the destination of where we land and how we govern, but making sure that we have a good journey to get to that place. So the thing that I think changes in modern society in modern times versus before the internet was created is we can pop out of that train. We can literally transport our consciousness. Right now, I can pop out of this conversation in 2 seconds and be in another conversation over in Italy right at this moment. And I think we need to be aware of who we decide to go on journeys with and how long we decide to go. So that's why I said the when is more important than the how. When do we do that? And how we decide to get off the train and get on the train could be debated forever. I think, you know, oh, I trusted you to bring all the food because we're going from New York all the way to California. And when we get there, you were the one with all the food, and then you just popped out of the train and now there's no more food for everybody. And I think how we have conversations together is really, really more important than where we end up, because those conversations will bring us to the place that we end up. So the journey being more important than the destination is what I want to bring up here, and making that journey pleasant. I think that's what we've done here at GCC. We don't know how we're going to govern, how we're going to listen, but we all went on a journey together to the point where it's Saturday, what is it, November 8th or 9th? I don't even know the date, the 9th. And we're having a conversation where Sam is letting everyone speak. This was a long journey just to get to this type of communication skill. So I hope that we focus, like Douglas Carmichael said, on what we're talking about and considering and learning from each other. Because without those skills of learning, when we get to our destination, then we'll be able to govern or not govern. But if we don't learn, governance does not matter. So how we teach, how we listen, how we learn, how we communicate, I think should be our only thing that we talk about and the only thing that's important. And the rest will happen emergently, naturally, organically. But how we communicate to each other is the most important thing. And if we can keep getting better at that, the rest will take care of itself. Because of our individual beauty, dignity, collective knowledge, individually, we are amazing. And if we can't hear that amazingness, we'll be stuck in our own paradigms. And with that, I'm complete. I just want to really, communication is the biggest focus. And thank you for letting me communicate on this forum and giving your attention. I appreciate it. And thank you. I want to listen to everyone else because I think you're beautiful people. Thank you.
Just one very quick observation. The example you used, Joshua, was about the free rider. The free rider getting off the train without providing what they were asked to bring is a governance question. The governance question at the start is, if you commit to coming on this train journey, what will you bring? So governance is nested. It's not just at the end of the journey, right? So you need to have some mechanism for mutual agreement. So just letting you know that, to me, mechanisms within mechanisms.
I apologize to interject real quick, Neil. I actually forgot to say that part because I just thought it was implied, which you picked right up on, is who you put on the trains together is the governance in the beginning. And then there's governance in the middle and governance at the end. And I just wanted to break it into threes, as I see on Alex's refrigerator, 1, 2, 3. There's not one governance, there's 3 governance in any journey. Who's going on the journey, what you're doing on the journey, and what you're doing when you get there. So having one governance conversation is ridiculous. Having 3 governance conversations will allow for that to happen. So you are absolutely correct, Neil. Knowing who's going to get on the train is how you decide if you want to go. What Douglas Carmichael was saying, I want to have these conversations. If I don't know what the conversation is going to be, how do I know I even want to go on that train? And that, to me, is what we need to focus in on. Is we have 14 communities we're talking about weaving together. If we don't know what each one of those 14 conversations are about, how can we weave those together? With that, I'm complete. I'm sorry to.
So may I take an opportunity? I've stacked up a number of things that have been going on in the last 40 minutes or so. So not all of this needs to take a lot of time, but I actually think this whole weaving notion is taking place. You know, in fact, Neil knows that he attempted to weave 2 years ago, and there were some antibodies that bounced him out, or he felt bounced out. So, you know, this weaving is taking place. You know, Alexander and I have been in conversation since what, 2014, maybe 2012. Dino and I were in conversation since 2012. Others, Douglas and I have been in conversations since 2011, possibly even earlier than that, because I think you attended some conferences that we put together way back at the Tech Museum. So I think this weaving is taking place. It just may not be as explicit and as transparent. And in being hidden in this way, we don't necessarily have even that critical mass yet to understand best practices in these, or even next practices in these weaving style conversations. On the other hand, you'll notice that the startups like Meetup, well, you can't really call them a startup anymore, they're like 10 years old, have facilitated a lot of these kind of conversations. And those who take advantage of that have known how to get into these conversations, what takes place in these conversations, how to work the quote unquote networking, if that word is still in vogue. So I do think that it's happening. I think the difference is that it may not be a recognized body of practice or a body of knowledge yet that might be helpful for some of us to share with each other. So that's thought number one. Douglas, your idea of this, or Doug, Breitbart, your idea of this limitation of select 3 in the poll, yeah, that was definitely artificial, okay? And I definitely knew it was gonna rankle some. And I definitely knew, however, that it was only the first step. It was going to lead to other steps. You know, this conversation, for example, with the summary preparation that I made was a next step. And there will be, hopefully, if I live that long, another next step beyond this as well, okay? So yeah, that was definitely just a quick cut. And it is not a final cut, it's just the initial cut, okay? We've seen a lot of brainstorming sessions, you know, take, you know, what's your top 1, what's your top 3, what's your top 5, what's your top 10, rank it by 20 to 1. You know, there's a number of different methods. This was just one that was simple to communicate and was quick for people to understand and quick to respond to. Typically, you know probably that the longer it takes for someone to understand something, the less response you're going to get. So this was just the first step. That was idea number 2. Number 3 is, although it looked like a lot of work, it actually was the culmination of a lot of different forms of presentation that have come and gone in the last 2 years, either in form of documents or diagrams or outlines or blogs. So I find it interesting that it's perhaps a visual representation that hasn't been tried before that might have made an impact. I'm curious about that. Or was it the way that it was presented or discussed? I'm still curious about that. So I view it as not a culmination of any work at all. I just view it as a snapshot of work in progress that I wanted to share with people. And by the way, since it is visual in form, Alexander in particular will recognize this, but Dino and Froda and David Price will recognize we had many diagrams that we shared, 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And in fact, one of the diagrams we shared was a very complicated one that we actually call the boombox diagram. It had 2 very large speakers, with lots of boxes, in those speakers, and then an amplifier in the middle, with lots of other boxes and knobs and whatever. We call that the boombox diagram. So anyway, I'd love to be able to walk through that or map that into what I just did in the last 24 hours or so at some point for each of you. So that's idea number 3, is that it's a snapshot. It's not actually, in my opinion, as much work as it is presentation. And I think that's a key difference. Okay, so that's idea number 3. Idea number 4, this idea of content versus process. I think that, Douglas, I think Dr. Carmichael, you brought this up. We actually do bounce around quite a bit in these GCC conversations, from process to content and all the way in between. And so at the moment, you're actually getting something which is perhaps at one extreme than the other. But yeah, those who are attendees on a regular basis can attest that, we go all over. So I just want to at least put that in perspective. That's a quick one. This facilitation and mapping and sensing question that you brought up, Neil, I think we're all doing this. In these conversations, I am moderator in name, but I carry really no authority, and so whoever speaks, whoever decides to speak and use the visual, conventions that we've evolved, we're all facilitating this. And we're all learning this in the last 2 years, just as you're holding up your hand as well. Okay, so let me get about 2 more points done, and then I'll let you speak. So I do think that the key point I heard in your message about that is we all have different skills, and we're all attuned to listen for different things. And we're all kind of trying to steer it slightly differently towards a possible different conclusion. And that's an interesting dynamic. Is when you get a number of people who are very skilled in conversation, who are very sensitive, and yet still have agendas. This might be another smart people problem. And you sort of see how conversation can still appear to digress, but they're actually covering a wide amount of territory with a lot of good insights being shared. So that was an oblique reference to your point that you just made. And then Phalan, you and I have talked about anthropomorphizing the us. And initially, I actually don't do that very much, okay? Because I think anthropomorphizing the us, if you don't do it carefully, can lead us to believe we have capabilities that might be difficult to map. And there's a lot behind that statement. We can have a lot of conversation. But I do see the value if done carefully. So I do want to understand this point with you and have more of these conversations. And as you know, we have these conversations on Mondays. So my last point here, which I really kind of almost want to close on, and this is one that I've actually mentioned a few times now, is one of the best things that we can learn how to do, that I learned how to do here, is how to disagree well. Because there are apparent disagreements just based on words. There are apparent disagreements based on assumptions. There are apparent disagreements just based on misunderstandings. And if we lean in, and if we have the curiosity and generosity to really, really unpeel that, typically we find a much tighter bond between the two of us or the N of us at the end of that. Whereas if the initial reaction is, oh, I disagree with you, or you're different than me, or wow, how can you think that? That's typically a polarizing reaction. So one of the things that I've learned most here is how to lean in to each of these occurrences. Not so much to be right. Some people think I need to be right. I really don't need to be right, okay? I just want to understand you. And that's the reason I'm leaning in. And that by itself is misunderstood quite a bit. And I'll just end there. Over. Alex, you had your finger up, or who else? Neil, you did.
Yeah, I can go, or somebody else can go, whichever. My only quick point, Sam, was the process I was describing was a universal process, not focused on this group. And this is part of the issue. Just because we do it well inside the group doesn't necessarily make the difference it needs to make. And so how do we take these skills further, especially if we're reaching out to other groups and to people with different levels of consciousness, different levels of understanding of the systemic issues. All of us here are pretty well versed in the global catastrophic, but how we actually communicate that to others. And I was playing on that, and how do we do that? So it's a skill that once learned collectively can be replicated.
Doug, Alex?
Yeah, I want to circle back. I want to put a tack in the replication thing, Neil, that you just raised, but I want to circle back to something that Phalan said. The system that's prevailed has been about power over and scarcity, and on a human condition basis, the vast bulk of our species live in fear as the pervasive principle, experiential principle of their existence. And fear has a way of keeping us isolated and keeping us from actually connecting and communicating. And getting reacquainted with individual agency, power, generative, contributive value to bring. And so I really, in my experience, what I'm seeing and touching is much more of the imaginal cell reality around the world of small individual efforts and small group efforts on local bases that are emergences of reconnection with self-determinancy and agency and ability to contribute and to solve and to heal. And there is sort of this global awakening and learning that I think is unprecedented because of technology, because of the internet leveling the playing field and just providing this massive increase of access for the many to more of what's known and what's available and what's been discovered and figured out. But on an experiential level, it's impossible for somebody in fear to learn. So getting to safety so that somebody can transcend fear is a real requisite to them being able to take in and open up and reconnect on an emotional level with their own humanity. And so, like on some basic threshold fundamental levels, creating these containers, and this is going back, I think, to something Alexander alluded to earlier, creating these containers where this kind of connection and communication and exchange can happen is about creating safety. And even on a, abstracted, sophisticated, somebody clicking the button and claiming a square in a Zoom session is scary to many. And those are people that are educated, that are sophisticated, that are, quote, on the privileged end of the scale. And their inherent fear stops them from engaging and participating and contributing in these kinds of forums. So, crawl before we walk, walk before we run. But I think that's happening. I think it's emerging. And Douglas, for me, that's part of the answer to the sort of, extrapolated nightmare that, yeah, the old institutions and the old structures are collapsing under their own weight and failing, be it banking or government or other. But there's a tremendous grassroots upwelling of replacements designed to meet people's needs on a DIY self-help basis. And I'm touching some of those. I'm involved with, looking at reforestation plus holochain distributed mesh networked forests and platforms and tools and systems for peer-to-peer banking and accounting and tracking and securitizing and communicating and education. And I think all of these things are happening. They're just not in a public way. So whether we're smart enough to transcend lizard brain and self-interest in time to avoid a global extinction, don't know. Verdict is still out on that. But are there signs that we're headed there? If you look at the bottom-up grassroots stuff that's going on all over the world in tens of thousands of conversations just like this one, I think yes. But then again, I'm also an inveterate optimist. And with that, I'm complete.
I just want a meta note for the record. We're about 9 minutes, is it, to the top of the hour. I don't have a hard stop. We could go a little bit beyond that, but I just wanted to see if people had some additional thoughts to throw into the pool of meaning, or whether we wanted a round of checkouts. Just Winder has his hand up, and then Alex. And then Alexander.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a point that Doug made. It's something that is bothering me and has been for some years. And I brought this up on Thursday, and it doesn't seem to be going very far. I might be on my own. It might be really silly, but it comes to my attention that the ruling class is 0.01%. May be taking the whole of the human race towards extinction, apart from the animals, of course, and that's a different matter. To reduce the world population through that corridor rather than other corridors presently, and then do something about the climate change. And the evidence that I'm picking up so far points to that direction, and I'm not the one who's making up this story. I am just picking up on the evidence, and a lot of it is out there if you search for it. I wasn't particularly searching for it, but that's what's coming through to me from various pieces. I can put them on GCC if people want to follow it up. That's the least I can do. So the human race as such will not become extinct. Those who are in charge want to control it and keep it that way. And it's up to the rest of us to try and make the best that we can of the situation, so that we are not in that situation whereby we become just slaves to the people who are controlling us. I'm complete.
Alex, then Alexander.
If we're in a situation where we have to rewrite the rules for society, that's when we need to lean in and do the deep dives and learn what people are interested in, learn what issues people are most concerned about, and these will get raised up to the top of the list. The augmented intelligence can do that quite effectively with social media. The thing I want to remind people is that there's a couple of billion people on this planet that are not online, not even on the internet. But that's changing. Within the next 5 years or so, I recommend that everyone will have a smartphone and be able to get involved in a conversation or a local group that plants trees with hollow coin. If you put a stake in the ground next to your tree with a hollow tag, it'll be registered on the geo satellite location device. So, because a tree, at the moment, a tree is worth about $15,000, but in 5 years, a tree will be worth $50,000. You see, we plant trees now because you'll be able to sit in the shade of those trees. Your children will be able to sit in the shade of those trees if we get our act together. So I suggest anyone who can make a web page to start now working on learning how to do it, and start a local website, a local web page. Invite your friends to join in and add links to this one, add links to the GCC group, add links to the movement weavers, because those pages you create are helping the AI learn. Over.
Thanks, Alex. Alexander.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by this conversation. There's both the sense of optimism, the sense of despair, and something that I'm working on now myself these days is how to move from an orientation of planning, which I think is got us into a lot of messes as a species, where we project and extrapolate and we say, okay, this is how things are going now, then we should do this for the next 5 years. You know, we plan and impose, and it's just it's a mess. And then we've moved to designing, which is much more interesting, and fascinated by how we can imagine desirable futures and backcast. You know, Sam, we've talked a lot about backcasting and about having aspirational and vision-based designs, collective dreaming in that sense. And still there's a sense of imposition on that. It's still us humans dreaming about it. And non-inclusion, as Alex was just pointing out, so many people, voices not present in the conversation. So I'm now really interested in curating emergence. And that's listening into that which is already emerging, listening into what is seeking to emerge. And in this frame, I'm drawing a lot on the frames of biomimicry, where you look at nature, how does it do it? And this is definitely a time of collapse. But in the same way, I think that the caterpillar and the chrysalis collapses in order for the butterfly to emerge. And when you look at that, there's a point in the chrysalis where the caterpillar is creating what are called imaginal discs. They're not even cells, they're protocells, but they are sort of foretelling of the cells of the butterfly. These are seen as foreign bodies to the caterpillar. So the caterpillar's body, the immune system attacks these discs and destroys them, but they're produced at a higher rate than the caterpillar's body can destroy in the chrysalis. When there's sufficient of them, they start to form imaginal cells. And these cells are imaginal because they're not yet clearly butterfly cells. They are, you can't tell what part of the butterfly they're going to be, but they are cells because they have a nucleus and so on. And when there's sufficient of those, then they start to differentiate and the butterfly starts to take shape. But there's this period of chaos and destruction and where these peripheral isolate ideas and initiatives, these imaginal discs, are being destroyed by the system that is currently in place. And yet it prevails. These smaller systems do prevail, do come through. I think if we work with this system, this is part of what we're doing as not just a global civilization, but as a planetary being, is going through this kind of chrysalis moment. And just to build on something Doug was saying also with this, it's, it's not sufficient to be able to just look for what we call the systemic leverage points, points at which we can, hey, this is how we're going to move the train out of the station. This is where we're going to go, and we're going to focus on this. We're going to make this happen. Great, important, needed. But we also need to focus on what we can think of, or what I like to think of as the systemic nurturance spaces. How do we create those greenhouses, those, like Joshua was saying, those train stations, the places that bring people together. It doesn't have to be a physical place. It can be an online place, right? This is what Ben Roberts is doing and what Ben Bowler is doing and several others, right? You mentioned those. So, but how do we are doing this. So this is doing this. It gives me heart to know that we are doing this. And it's happening in very many places. And I think just to wrap this, there's a dance between, doing this consciously and making it happen, like this is kind of like steering, that's the governance issue that Neil was talking about. And sort of giving space for it to emerge, creating those nurturance spaces where it kind of self-assembles. And given those, even though the caterpillar is going to try to destroy those spaces, right? That's what Josh Winder was talking about. I mean, I think that's where the 1% is going to try to destroy those things. But I think persistently creating those spaces, that is the pattern of emergence. And it's just not just a call for optimism. I think this is the pattern of evolutionary dynamics of complex adaptive systems. We're just a part of that right now. Complete.
I think it's hard for me to describe it outside of anthropomorphizing the collective us, but I keep on coming back to story. What is the story? What's the story of this collective agency that we have and that we're developing? I think that there's something there that ties in everything that we've been talking about. How do we get everybody on board to the same story? What brings people to that train station, as Alex says, and Joshua before him? I think most of our focus has to be there. What is that collective story? With that, I'm complete.
Just an observation, Phalan, in work I've done in communities in Australia, there's often more than one story. The challenge is to hold that complexity, that plurality of stories together in a room, and to let them see the fact that there's more than one story. It takes an outsider with catalytic skills to allow them to see that they are actually their own antibodies. They're actually fighting each other internally without realizing it. This comes back a bit to what Alexander was saying. So in communities that I've been into, you know, the fathers and fathers-in-law say, yeah, the economy's going fine, you know, we've got the water rights, we've got the food rights, we've got international markets, the economy's great. And the daughters and daughters-in-law are going, but Dad, there's two teachers in the school, there's going to be one next year. You know, they've got to have 400 kilometres to go to shopping. You know, there's no health system. So the communities are failing even though the economy is thriving. And the two stories are in the same room. And when you allow them to see each other by asking, how come there's two stories? They turn to each other accusingly, you sold me out. And then they turn to you and say, shit, you're right, there's two stories. How can you help us? But you've got to get them to recognize that there's already more than one story.
Yeah,
and
when I say our collective story, I don't necessarily mean a homogeneous story of us that doesn't take into account these complexities that we're all inherently immersed in. I mean that each and every single one of our individual stories is contributing to a larger story in a very stigmergic way. That's what I'm talking about, to understand how all of the movements that we are just seemingly unconsciously embroiled in, how is it contributing to that larger story? Like if we're able to take the superposition of being immersed in it and being able to kind of outside of ourselves direct that agency on an individual level, and of course extend it out into a more super conscious, collective conscious level. That's when I talk about story, it's that just the individual journey that we undergo. How is it that we can take those learnings and see a collective us going through that? How is it that within that space that we're all immersed in right now, how is it that we can develop that type of intelligence towards that type of collective agency? You know, how are we able to direct that from that space? Develop a definition of the us within that space that could lend towards that agency.
Yeah, thank you. Alexander, you had your hand up for a while.
Just quickly, just to add to that, I mean, what I'm hearing Phalan saying, and I quite agree, there's a meta-narrative, you know, and to the meta-narrative that connects, the story that connects. A colleague, I'm not sure, Sam, if you know, he worked at the California Institute for Integral Studies, Yong Ming Tang, worked in the area of cultural synergy and developed a process called synergic inquiry. And synergic inquiry involves self-knowing, other-knowing, differences holding, and differences transcending. It sounds a lot, Neil, like very much like the process you're talking about, where you can have different narratives and they don't have to capitulate. You don't have to have one say, okay, you're right. Oh no, you're right. It's okay. How can you create the reference space that acknowledges and celebrates both narratives in a larger narrative? I think that's what I'm hearing Phalan get to. What is it that is one planet? You know, we have a collective common future. What is that narrative? Yeah.
You know, one of the very earliest things, I'm just taking 30 seconds here. One of the very earliest things that we did when we constituted this barn raising forum was we did a science fiction session. We said, what science fiction story would we like to write for the human race? You know, whether it's 5, 10, 15, 50, 100 years from now. So that is actually something that we used to kick off barn raising. It might be good to do it again because it's a chance not to just tell the to tell the story of what's happening, but to tell the story that we want to co-create. And it's part of co-visioning. So this is going to be my checkout. I'm going to let this thing go as long as it needs to, but this is my checkout, which is my point in trying to put this note together was to give this an opportunity of co-visioning, which I'm really, really happy about because some people who have never been here or have been here very infrequently are here today. And I think that's a very important part of this co-visioning as well as this network weaving and network overlapping phenomenon. Obviously, it's trying to make sense of things. So it's the second component of the GCC foci as I see it. I think it's potentially leading up to us possibly co-creating something, but more likely on a one-on-one basis before it goes any larger than that, which I think is very natural. I think there's still this notion of agreements and disagreements, which I think Doug and I have resolved, but there seems to be still some others who have some energy around this. So I'm looking to see whether or not there's more discussion required on that. On this knowing self business, I'm really, really, really curious to again invite feedback on these notions of being and doing good, whatever good means to you, and then those practices that follow. What does it mean to be accountable to yourself for doing good? Is that even a meaningful question? To me, I think it is, but some people think it's not, and I really like to lean into that one. And then understanding all of this is why I'm here. All those aspects that we just talked about. So I really appreciate your feedback to me. I know it was cursory the way it was done today. If you have a chance to go into any of this in more depth later on and have some feedback, I'm very, very open to it, either written, asynchronous, or real time on a Zoom session or a phone call, whatever, okay? Because I'm going to continue working on this clearly. Part of you know, some of you know, this is part of my commitment to Doug Engelbart, is to do this stuff. So that's what I'm doing. That's it for me. Anybody else?
Yeah, as I check out, I just want to emphasize what Neil said about the importance of that outsider to bring those two stories together, because I really don't think that that's emphasized enough. I know for myself, I can't be the actor in my drama and direct it at the same time. No matter how objective we think we are, it would be foolish to think that we're not conditioned by the same things that other people are. So I just want to throw that out there and emphasize that.
Yeah, I'll check out. And I just want to do a brief checkout with a story, which is being grateful for what we have at this moment collectively with humanity. And I remember when I first got on the internet, well, not the first time, but in 1992, when I was on the internet, there was so many things I dreamed of that would be created to help humanity communicate. And there wasn't even a browser, there was alt groups, and there was a bunch of places like Nerd World, and the data wasn't even created. It was all government data. And I just dreamed of a world where everyone would get connected to this internet and start putting up their ideas and their thoughts and their emotions and their stories. And fast forward almost 30 years later, here we are. And there is so much out there that we're overwhelmed and we're almost freaked out as a human society with too much information. So I'm very grateful that a lot of people are here, but there's still a lot more to come onto the internet. And I do see that happening with companies like Starlink, which are putting up over 40,000 satellites to connect everyone. So there's going to be another 2 to 3 billion people on this platform. But we do have, and this is something I try to share with people, but I feel like it gets lost, is humanity has a collective story, but how you find that story is not easy with all the noise. And if you learn how to search for any conversation, any community, people are calling what we're doing here the intellectual dark web. It was coined by Eric Weinstein. There are people that are amazing, having amazing conversations, building economies around amazing ideas and doing amazing things. And we can't always find them. So I just feel, as being a good human and a good steward to my human society that I live with, is to help each other steward our ideas, clearly communicate, and make sure that they can be found. Because if we can't find the conversation we want, then we end up getting force-fed conversations that we don't want. And I think that's what's killing humanity, is we're talking about subjects we don't want to talk about because they don't resonate with our personal individual journey on this path through being a human being on this planet called Earth. So knowing that anything that you want does exist if you search for it is what I want to leave with this checkout. Is if you really want something, you have to search for it. And if you don't find it, keep searching, because it's out there. And there will be people that will collect around those ideas if you have the faith and the hope in your fellow humans. And that's what I think we're trying to do right now, is collect around conversations we do want to have, not conversations we don't. With that, I'm complete. Thank you very much, Sam, for this, and everybody that's participated. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to do a check out before I go? I'll go with this little story about a guy talking to a crowd at a seminar. He was describing the power of multiplication to the audience, and he asked them all to imagine something, because he wanted their feedback after he finished. He said, imagine each one of you is holding a large sheet of newspaper, and you have to tear it in half 20 times. Each time you tear it in half, you put the two halves together before you tear it again. He said, after you've done that 20 times, how many bits of paper do you think you'll have? How many will you be holding? And he asked the crowd, and some people said 200, some people said 2,000, some people said 20,000. The answer was over 1 million. You can do it on a calculator. You just hit 2 times 1 equals, and you keep hitting the equals button until you've had 20 iterations. That's the power, they call it the power of multiplication. And that's what these groups use to grow big, like Herbalife. It's a power, they call it a powerful business technique to grow a collective group. So that's a thought I'll leave you with for anybody who's trying to start a local emergence. And thank you. Over.
Maybe I'll jump in with my checkout here, building on, well, what everyone is saying here. One of the things I really am impressed with what this group is doing, what I saw in the presentation, what I know about Sam from earlier conversations, is the kind of KISS strategy. Keep it simple, smarty. The last S is various, can be in various ways. But one of the things for engaging here is that I'm working on, and is reaffirmed in this conversation, is what I'm calling learning how to human better. You know, as a verb. How do we human well? And just focusing on that. How are we human? Often it's little kids who do the humaning really well. And we get that kind of warped when we go through socialization, acculturation. But how do we human well on this planet with other beings? And how do we human together? So that's one thing that I think is central to this. If we can human well individually, and if we can human well together, now that is the path. That is the path. You know, then the conversations around that will sort themselves out in a way that's That's what I'm hearing from Joshua very strongly as well. And finally, the last thing is to share with you what's on my chair, which is this, which is, you can see it. It says, be the systems you want to see in the world. You know, taking off of Mahatma Gandhi's be the change you want to see in the world. Be the systems you want to see in the world. This is kind of what the conversation, be these. How are we going to do that? But also, if you see that it says, be you in the world, right? Be you in the world. As an artist friend of mine pointed out, it also says the systems want to see. You know? So what's seeking to emerge here? What is seeking to emerge? And that we don't anthropomorphize, as Phalan is calling us. We're really listening to what is really wanting, not what we want to see emerge, but what is seeking to emerge here that is healthy, whole, that connects, that affirms life, that is future creating. So I think it's these conversations, the barn rising here. Thank you so much. I'm complete.
So first question, Alexander, where do we get a chair like that? Thanks, everybody. It's currently 4:17 a.m. in Australia. I can hear the birds starting up, which is wonderful. I might even go for a walk before I go back to bed. Great to connect with people all over the world, to see the commitment still to having these conversations and the fact that it's progressing. Lovely to see the nestedness of this. Great to see Sam's dedication to Doug Engelbart and how he has continued Doug's great work, and to also learn about some other connections between players in the group I wasn't aware of before. I'm sensing a lot of resonance and a greater consonance than I did when I was last involved with GCC, so congratulations to those that have stuck with it and kept that baby flying. I imagine it's bounced a few times in the meantime. I'm looking forward to seeing you all again at some stage. I may be relocating to Europe sometime in the next few months, depending on where things progress. I've made a commitment to continue work in this field, as Stacey picked up before, on ecological grief, but also on how do we create synergies once people have got to that stage of realising how dire things are, and start to accept that, now what? So how do we facilitate people getting into that space, and then from there? And it comes back to what Alexander said, how do we human better together? And we need to learn how to do that at the global scale, and that's going to come from doing it at multiple local scales and regional scales. So thanks everybody for having me. Thanks Sam for knocking on the door so late in the evening. I was just about to turn in. And I'm not sure if I will now. I might just stay up all day. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Anyone else with a few thoughts before we close for today?
Yeah, I'd just like to answer that particular ditty. How do we human better together? Well, I've only been here a couple of years. I think I've made some small difference to the way we do human. One of the things that I did insist upon right at the beginning was to leave nothing off the table. There were some reservations as to, well, we can't talk about this or we can't talk about that. And those reservations had to be put aside and we moved forward. I would add to that and say, now we must talk about those bits that we didn't talk about. We all put our hands on the elephant and described what we could smell and touch and see. We have to go deeper now, probably to the innards. There are conversations to be had that we haven't had that will make us much better and stronger and much more cohesive. And to Phalan, lovely name, young man. I like that name. Stick around. You're young enough, you're smart enough. It doesn't take long to get the hang of this thing. And it's going places, that I can tell you. And I want to be one of the train drivers. I'm complete.
Anyone else? I can't help myself, but I'm going to respond to this how do we human stuff, this question. In 2015, Frode Hegland and I collaborated on a conference in Palo Alto called The Future of Text, otherwise known as Program for the Future 2015. And I gave a 10-15-minute talk. And one of the main theses was I was trying to introduce to Silicon Valley this notion of full body meaning. And by that I meant not just intellectual, which is what most people think when we're getting together in these kind of forums, but there's a new age-ish notion that meaning is only from the heart. And I think that also needs to be dispelled. Meaning needs to be resonating and connecting with everyone else through all chakras. So you can't overweight the intellectual, but you also cannot overweight all the others or any of the others. We are full, whole human beings. That would be my response to what it means to be human. Not just better, but to finally be human. That would be my response. Anyone else? Don't let me have the last word. Going once? Going twice?
I'll say something.
Okay, Josh.
The chakras can get a little confusing and new agey, and I felt the same way, but the three brains in the body is what I'd like to see humanity. We've been working with the top one, but also the brain in your heart and the brain in your gut. So I've spent 3 years with the human microbiome, and I feel there's so many conversations I've had with individuals where they went, yeah, it sounds good, it's logical, my heart kind of can get with it, but something in my intuition, my gut says no. So if we could find that balance between the three brains, that's what I'm hoping for humanity to human better, is it feels good in your gut, your heart feels good with it, and logically it makes sense. If you can have those three, that would be a nice humanity. Whereas people say things that you know they're lying, but you want to believe that they're not. You love what they're saying because it feels and resonates good, but logically it also resonates, but your gut says no. Like, no, I don't trust this person. I don't trust this concept, this system. So if we could have a balance between the three brains in our body, I think that would be so beautiful. I just want to say that we can think with our intuition, and in new agey terms, our third eye. What does our intuition say about that? So with that, I'm complete. Thank you for letting me share humaning better.
Anyone else?
I'll just add real quick that I think what Joshua said is our greatest challenge. And I think that's why I'm always beating the drum about honesty, because I think within ourselves, we're really good at fooling ourselves. And unless there's some outside force to help us find congruence, we're not going to push ourselves to do that. Excuse me.
Thank you all. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you for letting me share some thoughts. Thank you for giving me valuable feedback. Thank you for sharing all the other things that happened today. And thanks for all the reconnections that took place today. This is awesome. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, guys.